Hi everyone, I'm sorry I can't be with you. I'm just recovering from a really small operation up in Mexico, but I wanted to get started on our next novel, which is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. As many of you are aware, this has just been turned into a film, and hopefully we'll be able to watch part of it at some point. But I just wanted to give us some background and context about the book before you start reading it. It's really important to know what was going on at the time of the book, which was during the Nazi era in Germany. So, of course, we can't talk about Nazism without speaking about Adolf Hitler, who was actually Austrian. It took him quite a number of years to become a German citizen. He did fight for Germany in World War I, but as an Austrian citizen. And he joined a very obscure party in southern Germany called the Deutsche Arbeitspartei, or the German Workers' Party, and he transformed it into something much bigger. It was just a group of men meeting in a beer hall until he took it over and turned it into a major political movement in Germany, because mainly he was a very skilled orator who knew how to rouse people's passions and inflame them with his rhetoric. And he did become a force to reckon with in Bavaria, which is the largest state in Germany, located in the southeast. His party he called the Nationalsozialisten, the National Socialists, but they weren't really socialists at all. They were populist fascists. They were extremely right-wing. In fact, they hated socialists. They were strongly anti-Marxist and anti-communist. Now, the name Nazi is not something that the National Socialists would have called themselves. Nazi was an insult taken from the name Ignacio, which was the traditional name of a stupid farmer in Germany. So to call someone a Nazi was to call them a country bumpkin. Anyway, fascism, back to fascism, is characterized by strong nationalism and a very strong autocratic or totalitarian government. And Hitler went out of his way to gain lots of power. He organized a coup d'etat in Munich in 1923, which failed, and he was sent to prison, during which time he wrote his book Mein Kampf, which was known as, in English as My Struggle. He did start winning seats in the federal parliament in Germany after his release from prison in 1925. And by 1931, through a number of clever political moves, he had control of parliament. But in 1933, he seized complete control of the German government by staging a terrorist plot to blow up the parliament building, the Reichstag, in Berlin. And at that time, very luckily for Hitler, President Hindenburg died, and at that point Hitler assumed complete control of Germany and it ceased to be a democracy. One very important point, one of the highlights of Nazi Germany from Hitler's perspective would have been the Olympic Games of 1936, in which Hitler was determined to show the world exactly how amazing Germany had become. He built a lot of his rhetoric around the belief that the Aryan people, and he saw Germans as the ultimate descendants of the Aryans, how superior they were. So anyone who wasn't blue-eyed and blonde hair with a nice straight nose was an Untermensch and not worth valuing. Of course, what shocked all Germans at that point is that a black American, Jesse Owens, won 4 gold medals in the 100-meter, 200-meter, and long jump events, and in the 4x100 relay event. And this stunned Germans because they did not believe that a black person, an Untermensch, could be physically superior to a German. Anyway, what caused World War II? Well, there was a lot of nationalistic tendency in Germany and in Europe in general, but particularly in Germany, they were looking for Lebensraum, or living room. There was a lot of resentment and unresolved issues that stemmed from the settlement of the First World War and the interwar period in Europe. The Germans at the end of the First World War were made to pay very, very crippling war reparations, particularly to France and Belgium, for the damage that had been done during the First World War. And that sent the economy into a complete spiral. Inflation got completely out of hand. My grandmother remembers going to the market and having to bring like a wheelbarrow of money just to buy a loaf of bread, because it was millions and millions of marks to the dollar at that point. And then the Great Depression came in 1930s. And that's really some of the conditions that led to Hitler's rise. People were desperate for a solution. Unemployment was at terrible levels. And in 1939, Hitler triggered the invasion of Poland on a pretense and occupied it. Again, this belief that Germans were the superior race led, you had to put someone down if you're going to put yourself up. And so he blamed all of Germany's problems on Jews. He had a completely pathological hatred of the Jews. And in 1933, he passed a series of laws that limited the rights of Jews in Germany. They effectively became second-class citizens, and they had to wear yellow stars identifying themselves as Jews, Jude. Businesses owned by Jews were boycotted. People had to shop only at German shops, and the first mass deportation started. Not only of Jews, but also communists, extreme Catholics, homosexuals, gypsies. And Hitler finally came up with the Endlösung, the final solution, which called for the extermination of all Jews in Europe. So there were a number of concentration camps set up across Europe. And the most infamous ones were Dachau, just outside of Munich, which we'll look at in a minute, Auschwitz, which is now in Poland, and Bergen-Belsen, which is in northern Germany. I visited Dachau in 2011, and I took these photos myself. It was one of the first concentration camps set up by Hitler, and here's the entrance on the left. And you can see the notorious and chilling legend on the gate here on the right that says, Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free, work makes free. Inside the barracks, there were simple bunk beds set up, but these barracks became soon overbearingly crowded, and you would have 6-7 men sleeping in one bunk, and the rest had to sleep on the floor. So while today it looks not bad at all, you have to imagine that there would have been horrible living conditions with human filth everywhere. At the back of the camp was this not unpleasant looking building, which was the crematorium. Here the old, the weak, and the sick were selected to have a shower, which you can see on the right-hand side. It says Brausebad. It means the lice shower, or the lice bath. But in reality, Zyklon B, a cyanide derivative, was pumped into the room, and people died, some quicker than others. Many were crushed to death as people rushed for the doors. The problem became what to do with all these bodies that were being exterminated, and so the Germans came up with this wonderful idea of cremating the bodies, and you can see the original ovens that are still in place at Dachau, where the bodies were cremated. It's very chilling, obviously. Our book takes place in Germany, and life in Germany, while not nearly as bad as in the camps, was very unpleasant. The big cities were bombed relentlessly by the Americans and British, particularly Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Munich, where our book is set in a small town outside of Munich, Düsseldorf, Bremen. Food shortages were very common. Malnutrition among children was common. My mother grew up in central Hamburg, and her building was the only building left standing in 1 square kilometer at the end of the war. And she suffered from quite serious malnutrition, and as a after effect today has osteoporosis, so her bones are quite brittle. She has to be very careful with bumps and bruises, because she can break her bones quite easily as a result of not having enough calcium as a child. Millions of German refugees fled in from Poland and Eastern Europe. At the end of the war, which swelled the population, these areas had been occupied by the Soviets, and there were areas where there were normally lots of Germans, but they all moved back into the borders of Germany proper. Of course, the infrastructure in Germany itself was completely devastated. Again, there were major food shortages, and many, many people starved to death in the end of World War II. I know my aunt's family, my grandfather's family fled from the Soviet zones. They wanted to get into the British or American zones as quickly as possible because they knew they would be treated with dignity. The Russians were famous for the mass rapes they used in Germany. And it was total anarchy in Germany until the West finally figured out that if they didn't help the Germans, the entire country would fall to communism, and so they'd better do something. But it did end up with the division ultimately until 1989 of the division of Germany into a democratic Western zone, West Germany, and communist East Germany. I'm going to ask you to follow up and watch a couple of videos that talk in a bit more detail about the rise of Hitler. Miss you guys, and thanks for listening.